Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Pivot Playbook, Turning Clients into Lifelong Customers with Ames Derek Lape. Today's webinar will be recorded and then later posted on our website. This does mean that all attendees will be automatically muted so that we get a quality recording. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box and we'll try to answer them throughout the presentation. But if we're unable to get to all the questions, we'll have a member of our marketing team reach out to you individually to make sure you get that answered. Before we get started, we'd like to invite you to join us for our next webinar on Tuesday, July 22nd at 9 a.m. Pacific Time. Join Chris Chamberlain for Marketing Moves That Matter by registering at yaim.com/training. And with that, I'll hand it over to Derek so that we can go ahead and get started. Take it away, Derek.
Thank you, Jordan, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. All right, so as most of you guys know, it's the reason why you're here. We're going to be going over pivoting, cross-selling, some different stuff like that. I did send out to some of my agents, there's going to be a little bit of a teaser at the end of this regarding kind of a way to combat those diminishing, comp rates we're all seeing. So make sure you stick around definitely for that. If you do have to jump off for some reason, for whatever, pops up, this will be recorded. It will be on our website, so you can always come back and check it out. But with that, let's go ahead and kind of get into what we're going to be talking about today. So to start with, here's kind of an outline. It's not going to stick exactly to this, but just giving you guys an idea of what we're going to be going over. One thing that I got up there is cross-sell or pivot. These terms get kind of used interchangeably quite a bit in our industry and just in general, which for most purposes is totally fine, right? But for this, I'm going to use cross-selling as more of kind of that bundling, right, idea we're all used to, adding multiple products. And pivoting is more of a pivoting away from a certain product and redirecting towards another one, whether that's because it's a better fit, you run into objections, whatever the case is. That's going to be more of kind of what I talk about for pivoting, just to kind of differentiate a little bit about what's going on. All right. So the first one's pretty simple. Why would you cross-sell? Why would you pivot away from stuff? You can kind of see down here in the bottom left, money, right? We all work on commission. We can't work for free. This isn't in order from most important to least important or anything like that. It's just one of the first things that pops into people's mind of when you add more policies to a client, you're going to get paid more money. Now, a lot of times those ancillaries and kind of things you put on there aren't going to be the biggest commissions, but it's still money you wouldn't have had you, not sold them that policy. You're also going to be servicing your clients a lot better. You're going to be taking care of them a lot better. It's going to help with retention. It's going to help with referrals. It's going to bring in a lot of stickiness for the clients to stay there, right? There's a lot of different studies out there. You can see anywhere from around 75 to 95% better retention once you start adding 2 to 3 policies per client versus just having one policy with the agent. No, that's a big range, but every study is a little bit different. The bottom line is it is proven that your clients will stick with you longer if they have more policies. They're not going to be jumping ship as much. So whatever that percentage is, it's pretty high. It's good. That's what you want to have. And this last one is quite honestly, it's our job, right? Our job as insurance professionals or advisors is to take care of our clients. They're coming to us as the experts to make sure that we're looking for gaps in coverages. We're thinking of things that they wouldn't think of, right? I don't know about you, but if you've ever taken your car to a mechanic or something like that, and they go in there to fix the air filter, right, and don't even mention anything else, you're probably kind of like, why, right? It's their job. Or a doctor, right? Same thing. There is a level to that where, sometimes they're just trying to sell stuff, but still, usually they're doing it to protect you or your vehicle or whatever the case is. And that's kind of what we want to do with our clients, right? We do this every day, all day. It's really easy for us to point out, different gaps or shortcomings in what they have, what they don't have, what they need. All right, so if you were on my last webinar, these next 2 slides are going to look a little familiar. Well, this one and then the one after the next slide. Basically, part of something that is one of the most important things you can do in this industry is normalizing the review process, right? You are not going to close every cross sell the first time, right? So this is kind of like, I don't know if you guys have heard planting seeds. If not, this will come up later in this exact webinar, but this is more kind of like tilling the soil, getting it ready to plant the seeds. You're putting in their mind that, hey, we are going to have annual, quarterly, whatever you want it to be, reviews, because their life changes, their needs change. This isn't a one and done process. Their plan for, insurance, protection, investing, whatever you're into should also change with them. And setting that, as what's going to happen from the beginning makes it a lot easier, right? Because later on when you're calling to try and cross sell, different things like that, it's not really a sales call anymore, right? You set it up as an expectation of this is a service call to take care of you and make sure everything is in line with what you need. So that's going to make it very, very easy. This is kind of the setup to cross-selling. You want to plant that in their head early on. And it's really going to help you for kind of when you get into later on what we're going to get into here. But also it's going to do another thing, right? You're setting the scene of we're going to review stuff. We're going to make sure you have everything you need, which also puts in their head. And obviously you're going to say that a little bit more eloquently, right? This is just me talking to you guys, right? But when you plant that, I kind of do more than just this one policy in their heads, when another agent calls them with the next shiny product, you have a better shot of them calling you back before they sign that, right? Or they buy it or whatever the case is, because they remember, oh yeah, my agent does this. All right. So part of this, getting into it, there are a lot of agents who will do, just one or two things. They don't really get into a lot of different areas, and that's fine. But it would behoove you to actually have some complementary products. So if you are just in Medicare, right, you're going to want to have some of those ancillaries. You're going to want to have some other stuff you can offer, not only because of commission, but it's going to help you with that retention. When you have one client, they have basically a value to them as far as a monetary standpoint of what you're going to be getting paid for your commission. So let's say you help somebody with a life policy, we'll say in this case a final expense, right? As we all know, final expense is usually going towards kind of more of an elderly clientele for, price wise, what they're looking for, that kind of thing. With that, they're probably going to need some kind of Medicare or they're close to it, right? So let's say you add that for that person. Let's say they're married. They bring in their spouse, right? Because you help them with multiple things. They had a good experience. From there, maybe they're retiring. They already just retired. They have 401ks. You can roll that into an annuity, right? Then they start asking about things like long-term care or short-term care, and then they bring in their kids, their friends, because people ask about different questions and say, oh yeah, I got a great agent for that, right? From that one policy, you're turning into about 3 to 5 with 2 to 3 households. This is the easiest and best way for people to get leads, right? Referral rates on closing are so much higher than anything you're going to pay for. The people you get are going to stick with you longer. They're going to be a little bit more resistant to, price changes, different things going on. So this is a really good reason why you really kind of want to have cross-selling or different options in your quiver of arrows. All right. So this slide probably looks pretty familiar. Reason we have this up here is similar to objections. When you're leading these conversations, there's certain things you want to look for and do. It's going to make cross-selling a lot easier. And remember, this is kind of a high overview of cross-selling, right? We're going to get a little bit into the weeds with some of the, specific examples and stuff like that. But for right now, we're starting from scratch. Let's pretend nobody knows anything, right? So really what you want to do as the agent is whenever you talk to your clients, you want to lead the process. You want to clarify what matters most to them. If they have anything in place, you're trying to identify any gaps, exposures they have. And you're probably going to repeat through that a few times, as well as just building rapport and getting to know things and differentiating yourself, right, in that aspect too, and not making this just a transaction. But you're going to go through that a few times. And then what you're going to do is you are going to lead them to getting to what they need, right? So let's say they come in and they say, hey, I need an IUL, right? They may or may not. Maybe it's just something they saw on social media. Maybe it's something that they think they need. And as you go through this process, you're going to kind of identify as the expert what they actually need. And you will kind of lead them that way based off of what they're saying their worries are, what they think they need to cover, what they're hoping to get out of it. And you guide them gently that way, right? And I'm being very vague right now, but it's because there's a lot of different routes you can take with that. So as you're guiding them, you're getting them there, and you're offering a solution, right? The solution to what they think they need is going to be a lot easier to get them to buy into and get that policy than if you just start pitching, oh, we got this great product. It's got these features. It's got these riders. It's got yada, 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 right? Once they're starting to connect it to a personal kind of, okay, this will fix and address this need, it's much, much easier. And the same thing goes not only with objections, but with cross-selling, with selling in general, right? It all ties together. So many of the different ideas and, strategies and plans and whatever you want to call it, tools are going to be universal when it comes to sales, right? So learning them for one thing is just going to help you do it with another. So one thing that's really important to do is to think of more as a consultant and less of a salesperson. There's nothing wrong with being a salesperson, right? But as you can see, there are some key differences here. One's more transactional, trying to get the sale, right? And that's all their focus is. The other one's more looking at what can go wrong, right? What do we need to address? What is going to take care of this customer? And treating them as more of a friend and a family member. And this is really important for a few reasons. So one thing that's happened a lot, at least recently in the industry, is that whole add-on approach has kind of been going by the wayside, right? And what I mean by that is everybody knows, would you like fries with that from McDonald's? The whole add-on, kind of bundling method that State Farm has done for so long worked really, really well, right? And everyone kind of started copying it and just being like, hey, one more thing, or, would you like, I don't know, term life policy with that, homeowners insurance, and just adding it on. Problem is it worked too well. Everybody has copied this. I want you guys to all think about your day-to-day, interactions and what you go through, starting from emails, from when you go to the grocery store, from when you go to a restaurant, from when you go everywhere. Everything you do on every keypad, every website, right, is popping up with a, do you want to add X onto this? And we have become conditioned, or are being conditioned, to just ignore that now because it is everywhere. So if you come off as this is just an add-on or a transaction, a lot of people are shutting down and just saying no now. That thing that has worked so well for so long is not getting the same success as it used to, because unfortunately it worked too well, right? Everybody gets it too much in their daily lives, and now we are shifting away from that as people, as a society. We're getting a little bit fed up of seeing it on absolutely everything everywhere, right? So really what you want to do is be able to show that, hey, this is something that's addressing your needs. This is something that's taking care of you, right? You're making it more of a personal, custom tailored approach versus just an add-on. Because nobody wants to feel like it's just an add-on or transaction anymore, right? They want to feel like you're doing this custom tailored plan for them. And in a way you are, right? They don't have to know that most people who buy Medicare Advantage would, benefit greatly from having a hospital indemnity to help fill some of those gaps, right? It's a little cookie cutter, but it's not, because it's what is also best for that client at that time, right? So it is a little bit still tailored to their needs and what is best for them. You're not sitting here just adding stuff on for your paycheck. You're not, just getting this one done and moving on to the next one, right? So kind of separating that in your brain and paying attention to, okay, how do I react to this when someone does this, right? Because there are still so many people out there pushing the, hey, just do the add-on thing, right? And it's not working the way it used to. So one question that I get a lot is kind of how do I know when I should push for cross-selling, getting into new policies, different things like that. As we mentioned, when you're leading these conversations, there's always going to be keywords, phrases, things you're looking for to make your life a lot easier, whether that's overcoming objections, making the initial sale, or in this case, cross-selling or pivoting to something else, right? What you're looking for, and I spelled that wrong, sorry about that, but green light means press forward. So if it's something they bring up, right, even if you led them there, cool, keep going forward. If you see that there is a giant gap or there is something that they are missing that could really come back and impact them in a negative way, bring it up, right? If it is something that you were pivoting to, like I just mentioned, Medicare Advantage and hospital indemnity that pairs perfectly together for gaps, bring it up, right? And we'll kind of get into some verbiage here in a minute, but those are times you want to bring it up. You want to move forward with it. When you get a yellow light, right, maybe they just seemed overwhelmed, they seem a little bit tired, they seem a little bit frustrated, you're sensing they just want to get out of there. That's when you kind of plant those seeds, right? It's kind of that, I just want to point this out now. We can revisit this later, but I wouldn't be doing my job or whatever you want to say if I didn't at least point this out now, right? And when you're at that point, it may or may not go right then, or it may come up later, but that's part of where we went back to that. We're planting other seeds of we are going to be doing reviews. We are coming back to stuff. Life changes. So should your coverage. Okay. So that's kind of that middle zone. And this is why it's so important to be paying attention to them when you're talking to them and what they're saying. And then you get to the red light. They are just resisting. You're feeling yourself starting to have to push a little bit too hard, if at all, because the best way to sell isn't pushing, right? It's leading. So if you're starting to push, that's also kind of a red flag to yourself. Okay, we need to revisit this later. Or you're just spitting it out there and it's just not, landing. They're not receiving anything you're saying at all. That's a good time to table it too, right? You kind of want to move on from it because all you're doing is getting them more frustrated, getting them more overwhelmed, whatever the case is, right? You don't want to keep pushing and pushing because they're just going to shut down and not listen. Right. So in line with that, timing obviously matters, which is why we're talking about it. Another thing you really want to do with that timing, because the best time to cross-sell is when you've either built trust with those clients, you have some kind of rapport, they're going to trust what you're saying a bit more, or when you have a relevant, conversation trigger. Like we mentioned, they bring something up and it's, oh, okay. You don't have to do it right that second. You can do it later in the conversation, but at least note it down of, okay, they said that they are worried about having some kind of assistance to take care of themselves because they don't want to be a burden on their loved ones, right? And you're talking about, Medicare supplements, right? That's a good idea that you're going to have to cross-sell or bring up, right? Long-term care, short-term care, at some point in that conversation, you at least want to plant the seed. So you got that trigger, you got that go ahead. The other kind of nice thing to remember is psychologically speaking, when somebody says yes to one thing and they feel good about it, right? Because they had a good experience of whatever you helped them with, they are going to be mentally more open to hearing about other stuff if it's relevant, right, to them. It doesn't have to be relevant to the first product you were selling, but it does have to be relevant to their situation and their needs, right? So in this case, long-term care wasn't really relevant to medical supplements, but it is relevant to what they were saying they needed or what they're worried about. So you kind of want to keep note of what they're saying, and it's going to make cross-selling a lot easier for those more difficult involved ones. There are simple kind of plug and play things that we'll get into as far as if you're selling this product, you should probably offer this one, right? Pretty straightforward. But some of this stuff won't, jump straight to your mind, and that's why you're looking for what they're worried about and where you can add different things. So these are some of those pairings I was talking about, things that complement each other very well. Obviously, if you get someone a Medicare Advantage plan, hospital indemnity is a great option to have. So is some kind of critical illness plan in there. Based off of where they are in that kind of red light, green light, yellow light scenario, this may be something you can go into instantly and close at the same time. This may be something that you're just planting some seeds for later. Even if you get a red light, you kind of have to go off a feel a little bit, right? You can still plant a seed and say, we're going to revisit this, down the road when we do your review, whether that's annually, semi-annually, whatever the case is. But don't go too far into it. If it's a red light, if it's a yellow, you can go a little bit further for planting some of those seeds and saying some of the great benefits, right, as far as what goes with that. And then see if they're going to kind of get back and be re-engaged into that green zone. Word choice and what you're saying matters. Having a script is great. Never stick exactly to the script, right? You want some kind of version of what these are saying here as far as verbiage, but you want to make it your own. You want to make it sound like you, right? Because you've been talking to this person. If you revert back to a script word for word, it's not going to sound right. It's going to sound a bit transactional. It's going to make them kind of question what you're doing, right? So one thing to think of when you're reading these, if you're writing these down, taking screenshots, whatever the case is, make it your own a little bit, adjust it. One thing that really helps, gives you a go-ahead when you're selling Medicare Advantage is if when you're talking to them in this process before and they mention anything like, I just don't want to be stuck with bills. I had a friend who went to the hospital and got, this huge stack of bills, yada, 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 right? That is a green light. We need to talk about hospital indemnity. This is perfect for what this client is worried about, right? It makes it so much easier to get in there and sell it. All right. Another one, final expense, Medicare, critical care, annuities, etc. Right? Final expense is one of those things where you can have a lot of stuff to pivot to. They're coming to you for final expense insurance. Like we talked about, majority of people buying final expense insurance are, in their 50s, late 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever the case is, and they're not looking into those other insurances because they're too expensive now. There's a lot of other things that are going to pair with that age bracket that they are going to need as they're going into retirement, as they're worried about, critical care costs, different things like that. And once again, here's some verbiage to kind of be able to go through it. Basically, you're just listening for things like, I don't want to leave a burden behind. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want my kids to have to come take care of me. I have a bunch of money in a 401k and I don't know what to do with it, right? Whatever those triggers are, you're just kind of listening and looking for some different keywords that are going to help it make it easier to either pivot off of this because maybe they don't really need final expense, or to pair something else with it. Annuities, same thing, right? There's a lot of things that you can give with that. It can be, different critical cares. I have IULs and hybrids on here because one thing that a lot of people come to us for annuities, they're still very concerned about having some kind of long-term care. They're really concerned about getting some type of insurance. Maybe they were turned down just for a straight insurance policy. This is one of those times I pivot a lot, right? I will go from an annuity to some kind of hybrid all the time, especially if you're listening for those keywords and they're saying things that, trigger those green lights of, hey, I'm worried about being a burden, yada, yada, yada. Okay. That's where it's like, okay, this agent right now is calling me to get an annuity, but their client's saying, yes, they want an annuity. Yes, they're wanting a safe place to put their money they can get to, but they're really concerned about, right, critical care. They're really concerned about life insurance and leaving stuff behind, right? That's when we pivot to some kind of hybrid, whether that's a life with LTC or an annuity with LTC. and we give them a better option of what they want. And it's a lot easier to close that sale, to meet the client's needs, to better take care of their situation. Once again, whole life IULs, right? Looking for key triggers and finding out what they want. Just some more verbiage. I'm just going to leave it here for anybody grabbing screenshots, taking out some notes. Remember, this will be recorded and up on our website, so you can go back there and check it out. As far as general framing and transitional language, right? As I mentioned, here's a bunch of scripts for things to be able to lead into cross-selling. The key takeaway is you are leading with service, that you are taking care of the client. You don't want to pressure. This isn't a transactional add-on, right? We want to get that out of our heads and get away from that, okay? So these are all really easy ones, adjust as needed, but there are things like a lot of my clients in your situation usually ask me about X. Have you thought about that yet, right? Or would it be okay if I walked you through a gap? I see you catch a lot of people off guard, right? Medicare Advantage, hospital indemnity. And then would it be okay if we get into this, right? Just so many different easy ways to get into that next step with that client as you're pointing it out. And the nice thing is this comes off as a lot more informational and like you're taking care of them, and they will be eager to listen to it, right? Versus the, oh, let's add the hospital indemnity onto that. Because that's going to turn a lot of people off. They're going to stop listening. They're so used to it to their day-to-day lives, like we talked about, versus actually sounding like you care, because pretty much all the agents I've talked to do care about their clients, right? They want to make sure they're well taken care of. They want to make sure they're getting them the right policies. And it's just a win-win for everybody, because when you go through that and they are feeling like you are addressing their needs and wants, they're more likely to stick with you. They're more likely to bring over, referrals and different people to you, which is going to help with a lot of things. The bottom one there, as I mentioned, a good way to kind of bring it up later if you're hitting a yellow light. So this is something we'll revisit in greater detail later, but I feel it's important, at least at this point, to mention it. Or I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention this. Whatever you want to phrase it as, like I said, make it your own, okay? Right. So the pre-mortem question, right? Basically, the simple term of, have you thought about, what life is going to be like for your family, loved ones, whatever, if one of you guys die, right? This has a little bit more importance sometimes, especially when the person you're asking is the main breadwinner at the time and the other spouse is maybe staying at home with the kids. The fact that they would have to go back, find a job, work back up the pay scale, bring in childcare, different things like that. But it does work the other way around, right? If the person who's staying at home passes too, even the one who's working is going to have to bring in childcare and different things, right? Maybe they're both working, they're going to go down to one income. So there's a lot of different things that is really powerful for this question. You don't want to phrase it as a scare tactic. I know a little over 10 years ago, one of the agents I worked for very much so kind of like to scare people or get them a little bit, on the edge of their seats about, this is horrible. What if this happens? That doesn't work. A lot of people shut down. This is a really hard question for a lot of people to think about, especially if they're younger, and just what's there. I've talked to some agents and they'll get a lot of people who shut down on this, right? And it's one of those things where a lack of thinking about it or planning for it isn't going to stop it from happening, right? I know this is a very difficult conversation, but I want to make sure you, your loved ones, your family, whatever applies, are taken care of, okay? And getting them to think about it. And this is an amazing question because it's going to disarm them a little bit. It doesn't assume that you're doing it just for a sale, right? Because what are you trying to sell from this exactly? Especially if you're talking about something that's not life insurance, you're more just getting information. And you're going to get a lot of the true, worries, what the client values out of this answer, right? And tweak it around a little bit how you phrase it so it's based off of you. But it's really great because it's kind of taking you out of this realm of selling to being able to offer solutions to the problems and things they value, which makes your life a lot easier, whether it's that initial sell, objections, or in this case, cross-selling to something else, right? Because maybe you're talking about medical supplements when you ask this question, okay? And they start bringing up things about, 401ks, about not having life insurance, all these things that they worry about, but you wouldn't have got to without asking the right questions, right? If they had come to you and this was a transactional procedure, one and done, here you go, you would miss out on all this as far as servicing the client and also, right, commissions. It's a good thing to get. Costs of staying silent. Part of the reason a lot of agents don't ask these questions, and I shouldn't say a lot, but a lot of newer ones, is because they're scared of killing the momentum of the sale. They have somebody on board to get something. They don't want to ask a bunch of other questions that may make this, client shut down or change their mind. They just want to get that one done. They will try and come back to stuff later, maybe, right? And they don't get into all those details. They don't really look at it as more of a consultant view. It's more of that sales approach view. And I say this from personal experience. When I was a brand new agent, I brought over a family, got them homeowners, auto, a personal liability umbrella, and I didn't really ask any other questions. And I felt pretty good about myself. I put some notes in the system that I was going to call them back in about 6 months and kind of ask about life insurance. But at the time, I didn't want to put too much into it, right? I was happy for the sale I got. About 3 months later, I got a phone call from his wife crying. He passed away. And she asked if he had life insurance with us because they had it with the other company we took it from, their policies, right? He canceled everything, including his life insurance, even though we never discussed life insurance. And she was now at home, stay-at-home mother, I believe it was 4 kids, and no source of income, no help with anything. And this is something that got me over that fear of killing a sale or, maybe annoying somebody with too many questions very quickly, right? Because this is something, I could have prevented, or at least I could have asked about. He may have said no. He may have not thought it was a big deal anymore because they were young. But at least I would have been able to ask and address some of this sooner on as more of an important thing to do, right? And it's something that I live with, right? It just isn't a great situation to get that phone call. It would have been a lot better to have been like, yes, we moved over this life insurance. We discussed this, right? And it's one of those things that took me from a transactional one and done to really a consultative approach of looking at what can go wrong. What are we missing? What does this person statistically need? What are they saying they're worried about, right? And finding out what aligns and building a comprehensive plan of what can help them. Because even if you do just focus on one product line, right, and you really care about these people and you're assuming someone else is going to do it, there's a lot of agents that do not do it. There is a lot of agents who focus on just what they focus on, and these people are not getting a lot of help and advice from where they need it. So being able to at least pivot into those near surrounding things that complement what you're really selling isn't only going to help you and your paycheck and your retention, but it's also really going to take care of those clients better. So moving into a little bit of that teaser, I am going to throw out one disclaimer here. I am not an attorney, right? I do not know every state's laws. So before you get too excited and start doing this instantly, please go on your Office of Insurance Commissioner or whatever you guys call it for your state's website. Start looking into this. But one thing that has been brought up with a lot of people lately, and by people I mean agents, is comp rates have been going down, whether that's for med subs, whether that's PDPs completely cutting commissions on stuff. It's just one of those things that's the way the industry is going. I live in Washington State. One thing we can do is we can charge fees, right? We can have either advisor fees, insurance fees, consultant fees, whatever you want to call them, okay? This is something I never did as an agent or a financial advisor because I wasn't running into 8 to 10 years ago the comp rates we are today of where they're constantly dwindling down and down and down or just disappearing. However, I have had a lot of agents start calling in and asking about, can we do this? What are the rules? How do we do this? What's going on? I'm a little bit more versed on Washington, as I said, but most states, and this varies a bit per state, this is what I'm saying, look into your own state, but they will allow insurance agents to charge some kind of fee. Sometimes they are in lieu, and sometimes they're in addition to commissions, right? So you want to check what you can do. I know some of the agents that I've worked with that do this here, they will do some kind of, reimbursement of if they get a commission, they will give them so much of their feedback. But the key takeaway for what you really want to do, besides looking into this more per your state, is every state that does this, you have to have a disclosure, right? You have to say exactly what the fees are. You have to get it signed before you have your meeting. You have to go through all that fun paperwork and legal side. Most of the states, as far as what that fee can be, say it has to be a reasonable fee. Here in Washington, they go off of kind of market rate. So there's a lot of gray area. You can kind of set it, at pretty much whatever you want, as long as you can justify it based off of the market rate. And then you have to have that documentation, like I said, so showing that you have it. The reason I'm bringing this up is we all want to help our clients, but we can't work for free all the time. One thing that's going on with especially PDPs is a lot of people are just referring their clients to the website, or they're setting up, workshop classes with 10 to 15 of their clients at once in a library or setting and showing them how to go on the website and do all that themselves. There still are some agents out there, though, who are hungry and young, and they are willing to take the time to do that in hopes that they are going to be able to cross-sell or pivot to something else at some point. And it works, as we've seen, right? If they're willing to take that time and invest in help, especially when their agent's like, no, I can't do that, they're probably going to go talk to that agent about other stuff. So this is one avenue where you might be able to say, yes, I can help you with PDP. I do charge, right, a fee to walk you through the process, get in there, get this, et cetera, right? Because you're not going to be getting a commission on this. So it's a way to help do that. The fee, like I said, is kind of up to you, but it's an area where you can start making up on some of those commissions that are vanishing to be able to help your clients still without working for free, making everybody happy. You're not going to lose them to someone who's going there willing to take the loss on this in hopes of getting gain somewhere else. It's just a good thing to start looking into, because if you look at the trend of what's going on with commission rates, they are dropping across the board for a lot of stuff, and in some cases completely disappearing, right? So it's time to kind of look at what the future is going to be for commissions, especially if they keep dropping, and ways to combat that and find a way to still be able to help with stuff that you may be getting no commission on. As I mentioned, this may not work in your state, so please double check, but it is something that is going to be worth your time to go on Google, to go on your insurance commissioner website for your state and find out what the rules are, and maybe even just give them a call, right? Because this is something that's becoming more and more popular. I know when I called the OIC here, they've been getting a lot of phone calls about this lately, right? The person I talked to had been there for 10 years. She couldn't remember any phone calls, but over this last year, she has been getting a ton. So it is part of what the market is going to do. You won't be the only agent doing this, right? It is probably going to become the new norm. So keep that in mind, please. All right. As far as the conclusion, it's pretty simple, right? You want to explain things in plain English. You want to address their needs, ask smart questions, be patient, find out what their concerns really are. Show up when you say you will and how you say you will, right? So if you're going to offer some kind of, annual review, make sure you do it at some point. Pretty simple, but still important. And not just because it's a review of going through their insurance and sitting there and looking at, oh yeah, you got everything, cool, right? But trying to find what has changed, if there's new gaps, if there's areas that you need to fill with a different type of policy to be able to cross sell that and do that, right? And the rest of this we went through in pretty great detail as far as don't make it transactional, make it personable, right? Treat them the same way you would treat yourself, your family, your friends. When you are pivoting or cross selling, would it be a policy you would sell yourself, right? If you had what they had or were in their situation. If not, why offer it, right? Just a lot of simple things. And the nice thing with cross selling is when you build it this way, there's no real trick to it, right? You are offering them what they need, whether it's statistically or they tell you themselves. And it makes it very, very simple to offer these other things, right? So that's going to be the high level of cross selling. Obviously, there's some different tools and techniques you can get into. There's a lot of great books out there, right? But it's just one of those things where it's not as difficult as a lot of people make it sound, especially, you know, when you're cross selling to just complementary policy types that work with their needs. It would be a good idea to expand and look into some other areas, especially if you are in, let's say, the med sup or Medicare arena with the age demographic you're dealing with, right? Statistically speaking, they're probably going to have 401k somewhere that you can put into annuities. Life insurance, whether it's final expense or something else, is always going to be a big need based off the age. You know, short-term care or long-term care, because then you're getting this whole kind of life cycle value out of your clients, and you're also helping take care of them, right? They don't have to go do bits and pieces here and there with a bunch of different agents. It makes everything easier. So if you're trying to move into more cross-selling and you focus on one thing, start off with the complementary stuff. That's really, really easy. That's going to cover what they need. And then try and expand out into what your demographic client is and all the things they need, right? And that's going to vary a little bit person to person, but there's going to be some averages there that are going to fit for, 80% of your client book. So find those things, and it's just going to make life a lot easier. With that, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here. We did have a few questions pop up, but they're a little bit more specific, so I will answer this when I give you guys a call back. Yeah, otherwise, here's our information. Always feel free to reach out to us. If you are a little bit more curious about what may or may not fit with what you sell or what you're looking to do, give us a call, right? Talk to us. We can go through and point out some great things for your state, your area, what you focus on that are actually going to be competitive and, a good product fit. But from there, I wish everybody a great day, and thank you for being here.